Hi, welcome to Coding Bootcamp's YouTube channel. Subscribe now and join our live stream session later. See you.
Hey guys, welcome to codingbootcamps.com. This is Introduction to JavaScript Programming, and my name is Kaustubh Gharge. I'm a senior mean stack developer. I have 5 years of consulting experience with a focus on web and cloud technologies. I have completed my master's degree from Illinois Institute of Technology, where I took web development courses and created several projects. I also worked in 1871, that is a startup incubator in Chicago, as a full stack web developer, after which I co founded a company with my colleague from IIT called Indica Digital, and we focus on mortgage dealer strategy. I'm also a co founder of Pune based IntelliFlow Systems, which specializes in Azure cloud services. I'm a senior instructor at High School Technology Services. I've been teaching with High School Technology Services since 2016 to students from US and Canada. Uh, at the time, I used to teach cross-platform mobile application development as well as Linux, but I have focused all of my attention and energies on full stack web development as well as cloud. So in this course, before you take this course, actually, you need to be aware of HTML and CSS. Just a basic level of understanding is enough, but make sure you understand it because we are going to be covering quite a lot of JavaScript, at least the introduction to JavaScript, which is necessary in order to implement in web-based applications. So make sure you have at least elementary understanding of HTML and CSS. So the topics that we are going to be covering is how to use JavaScript. So we'll first understand the difference between web design and development. You already must have taken web design courses with CSS, but we'll be figuring out the difference between development and design. We will see how JavaScript works, the top JS frameworks, and how to set up JavaScript on your computer. In the next part, we will actually focus more on the programming, where we will focus on the core concepts such as lexical structures, expressions, types, strings, variables and values, objects, the console, scopes, arrays, semicolons, etc., etc. In the next section, that is the JavaScript programming part 2, we'll cover the conditional statements and loops. Don't worry if you have no experience with programming. We will be covering very elementary level of programming here as well. In the next section, that is the JavaScript programming part 3 section, we'll be covering functions. We'll understand what kind of JavaScript functions are available, and we will understand the new JS functions that have been introduced in JavaScript after the release of ECMAScript 6, which include arrow functions and the other functions. All right. And after that, we'll be working on the projects. So the first project is to create a simple calculator. So you will use your skills as a JavaScript developer as well as your skills of HTML and CSS to design a simple calculator and make sure it works. In the second project, we'll create a to-do list using HTML and JavaScript. For this, you'll need to have some basic understanding of HTML, like the local storage, since we will be storing the to-dos that the user adds in the local storage. And in the third project, again, we'll use the same concepts as the project 2, and we will be building a reading list of the books that you want to read and the books that you have read. All right, so what is the key takeaway by learning to finish this course? So the most important thing is it'll set a foundation of you becoming a web application developer. After this, you can take much more advanced courses, the advanced level of JavaScript, as well as explore different frameworks in which you deal with the tech stack, as we call it. So the tech stack is a framework, or not a framework, it's a combination of frameworks that include the front end as well as the back end and the database. You can be confident enough to explore those. Uh, we do have some courses related to those. So we have courses on the front-end frameworks such as Angular, React, and Vue.js. We also have intermediate JavaScript and jQuery courses in order to understand how jQuery works and what JSON is to get JSON data from a API. First of all, we'll also learn what API is to get data from the backend. And we have some backend specific courses such as Node.js, Express.js, and MongoDB. So once you understand JavaScript, you'll be very in a good position to explore the various uses of JavaScript on the front end as well as on the back end. All right. So thank you for taking the time. I hope you take this course, and I will see you in the next session. Hey guys, welcome to Introduction to JavaScript course. We at Coding Bootcamps are very excited to have you here. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. Alright, so we'll begin this session by understanding how we can learn JavaScript. I will give you some tips on how to learn JavaScript and practice so that you can start building applications. Next thing is we're going to learn the difference between web design and web development. You should already know this if you've taken our HTML and CSS course. But if not, then I highly recommend you complete that course before you join this one, because I will be covering a lot of JavaScript to manipulate the HTML and CSS files. So if you're not aware of HTML and CSS, you might have trouble catching up with this course. Next thing I'm going to cover is to understand how the JavaScript works, after which we'll be covering the major JavaScript frameworks. Now, mind you, these are not in detail, so we do have some different sessions or different courses based on these frameworks. You're welcome to check them out at Coding Bootcamp's website. And I'm going to end this session by making sure that we have all the necessary tools and the software installed to start learning and building applications using JavaScript. So let's begin. Alright, so I want to welcome you to this course. I'm sure you have covered HTML and CSS before, and now we'll be covering JavaScript. Now we already know how to build a website. We'll be learning JavaScript in order to add some functionality on top of that website so that the user can make changes on the website's data and it can be more user interactive, right? So let's begin. All right, so let me introduce myself. My name is Kaustubh. I know it's hard to pronounce, but you can call me by my initials. I've been a full stack web developer for past 5 years now. Um, I work at a company called Indicate Digital that I co-founded in 2018. Before that, I worked at a startup incubator in Chicago called 1871. I've been teaching at coding boot camps and high school technology services since 2016, and I've been taking online classes for students from Canada and United States. All right, so about this course. So we will be covering Introduction to JavaScript. I will not be covering the very advanced topics that are related to JavaScript. So we'll be mostly focused on the fundamental programming concepts of JavaScript, as well as manipulation of DOM, that is the HTML, throughout this course. If you want to take advanced JavaScript, I highly recommend you finish this course first, get a bit of more practice, and then move on to the advanced concepts, because advanced concepts do follow something called functional programming, and if you're not aware of that paradigm, it will be hard to catch up. All right, so how is this course structured? Okay, so look at this from a piece of a puzzle, right? First of all, the first task is to get the puzzle pieces ready, and then make sure that you have the puzzle board and you place one piece at a time until you solve the puzzle. So this is how I look at the course. So this is what I mean by puzzle pieces. So you have to get the basic concepts clear. You have to get the basic concepts very thorough, and so that you can start building application block by block. So think of an application like a complete puzzle, right? And this is how all of the learning should go naturally for all of the programming language that you're trying to learn. All right, how to follow this course. So the three key elements that you need to follow, and you have to reiterate them every time. Um, First is the learn. Obviously, you need to apply the first principles thinking here. Um, if you wanna build a great application, you should start building by writing a great function. Okay. So first thing is learn. Second thing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. You will not get good at it without practice. I can tell you, if you don't practice it, is going to be very hard to understand programming. And the last thing is obviously build. You have to apply what you have actually learned. So I encourage you to build big projects on your own, as well as look out for some open source projects that are out there that you can start contributing to. This will not only help you understand the fundamentals of programming and JavaScript, but it will also help you understand how the community works around these programming languages, and you can be a part of it. All right. So what we will have in this course is we'll focus on 3 projects. So we'll have 2 more sessions after this that will cover the fundamentals of programming, but after that we'll focus on the projects themselves. Okay. Um, I firmly believe that projects are a way to learn and not just reading the fundamental concepts. So let's see what the projects are. So we'll start by building a simple calculator. So this is just your basic arithmetic operations: addition, multiplication, division, subtraction, and modulus, right? So this is a very simple application, but we'll have a front end UI. So that is, the user will be allowed to enter 2 values, and then we will perform the arithmetic operation on those 2 values and print out the results. One of the projects is to build a to-do application using HTML and JavaScript. So you might be using um, pen and paper to write down the tasks of your day, or you might also be using an application called Wunderlist or Google Keep or whatever other application you might use. But what we are going to try to use JavaScript is to learn how to create this application from scratch. We won't be building a world-class application, I'll tell you right now, but I'll give you the basic understanding of how to start, and then maybe you can build something on top of it. I'd like to get surprised by what you build. And the last project that we're going to build is a reading list. Now, in the reading list, I'm sure you'll be using Amazon's Kindle or Apple Books or Google Books, and you may have books that you want to read from time to time, books you may have left incomplete, um, books that you want to take notes from, you know. So we'll be creating a reading list that will just list the books, and you'll have option of read or not read. Okay. This will help you understand how the Boolean value as well as the JavaScript objects work. All right, so what are the requirements for the course? So the first thing you need to have is a good computer. I highly recommend getting an actual personal computer rather than working on an iPad or a tablet computer. Um, I do not recommend using a phone because we will be using a lot of development tools that are provided in popular web browsers such as Google Chrome. So I highly recommend you get a computer with Mac OS or Windows 10 or Ubuntu and a good internet connection. We need internet connection because We will be downloading some of the libraries that are essential
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
for building our projects. You need to have the basic understanding of HTML and CSS. Since this is a purely JavaScript course, I won't be covering HTML and CSS at all. But you can always check HTML and CSS courses at our website at Coding Bootcamps. Again, so HTML and CSS is a prerequisite for this course. I highly recommend you complete that course before you start taking this course. Alright, so a quick refresher of web design and web development. So thus far I think you have covered HTML and CSS and you have understood the basic concepts of web design. With the introduction of JavaScript, you can add a bit of functionality to the website that you have designed. So we are moving or slowly transitioning from web design to web development. So what are the key terminologies that you need to familiarize yourself with? So the first one is front end and back end. So whatever you design using HTML and CSS is front end of the application. On the back end, you have something called a server where you can build APIs. So the APIs concept I will not go in detail, but I can tell you it's an application that runs on a server that connects to the database and that fulfills any request that the client's browser has. So for example, let's say let's consider Amazon for example. Let's say you wanted to search a product, you search the product, and what happens is that when you search a product, that query goes to the backend application, and the backend application fetches that information in the database and gives it to your browser. So on the browser has to get that information and present it to the user in a presentable format, right? So the front end in this case will be the Amazon's website, the Amazon's web application. So that will have three key elements. One is HTML, second is the CSS, and third is the JavaScript. So JavaScript is the one that is connecting to the back end so that we can fetch the data. The next thing is the user interface. So I think you already know this. User interface is the interface that you build using HTML and CSS so that the user can interact with your application. What is client-side and server-side scripting? So client-side scripting is like what we're going to do right now in this course, is using JavaScript to manipulate the HTML files, that is the DOM, the document object model, and make sure we update any of the DOM elements on the fly when the data gets updated. So you'll have a much better understanding as we proceed in this course. The next thing we have to understand is what is the difference between libraries versus frameworks. So libraries can be short snippets of code that somebody else has written for us, and then we can just reuse it. So for example, jQuery is a library. So jQuery is nothing but you know, a superscript of JavaScript. I mean, I would not call it a superscript, that's a wrong word. But it adds a bit more functionality on top of JavaScript so that the JavaScript can be used to manipulate the HTML and CSS. Framework is something that gives you a concrete structure to build out the entire front end of the application. So for example, let's consider Amazon again, for example. Let's say you want to build an application that has to support about 100,000 people at any given time, right? So you have entire east coast of US accessing Amazon as well as the west coast, and you want the application experience to be seamless, smooth, right? So in order to do that, you will rely on something called a framework. I mean, you can also code this using plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but a framework gives you much more options to work with, and it allows you to handle multiple requests, and it's much more easier to build on top of framework uh, than from scratch, for at least for project this size. But my recommendation is not to learn frameworks before you learn the key concepts of JavaScript. All right, so moving forward, what is the difference between static and dynamic websites? So static websites are usually your .org websites. I mean, technically they used to be .org websites at one point, where you just have some content written on the website, but you cannot do anything with it. But with dynamic websites, you can interact with that content. So for example, when you fill out a form and you get a response back, um, that is an example of a dynamic website. All right, so one of the terms that you will hear is full stack web development, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a full stack web developer at Indicate Digital. So what does full stack mean? So full stack is a stack of technologies that is used to perform a particular task. So for example, in our case of web application, the full stack will be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, one of the backend languages. So for example, consider Node.js that connects with a database. So let's consider MySQL as a database. So collection of these technologies creates a stack. So when you say a full stack web development, that means you work with all of these technologies, and a full stack web developer usually has to work with all these technologies. Web to mobile app development. I don't think this needs detailed explanation. Web is something uh, you run on uh, a browser, web browser, and mobile app is completely different, where you run your code on a mobile device. Java versus JavaScript. Okay, so this is very important. You have to understand Java is not in any way related to JavaScript. Java is a programming language that was invented at Sun Microsystems in early 90s, and JavaScript has been around again since early 90s, but JavaScript is completely different, and JavaScript runs in the web browser. Most of the part it used to run in the web browser, but in the recent years it has been adopted onto the backend uh, servers as well. But Java is purely a backend language, and Java is object-oriented, while JavaScript is not. JavaScript is what you call a functional programming language. So the functional programming aspect, we will touch on a few things in this course about functional programming, but not a lot of them. So if you want to learn more about functional programming, you have to check out the advanced JavaScript course. So content management system. So what is a content management system? So I believe you may have checked out a few blog sites. So for example, there's a famous blog by Shane Parrish called Farnham Street Blog. Um, that blog is built entirely on a CMS platform like WordPress, right? So wherever you have to manage a lot of content that you have to post onto the website, this is where a CMS system comes in handy. And let's say you have multiple people writing and multiple people posting something onto the website, a CMS makes everybody's job easier. So let's do a quick refresh on HTML so that we can move ahead with JavaScript. So HTML, as you know, is hypertext markup language that is used to create web pages that will be rendered onto a web browser. And for any HTML document, the document itself is defined by a document object model, right? So we'll be working with this document object model throughout this course and be using JavaScript to make changes on to a HTML file using this document object model. So You can access the HTML elements using this document. So let's say if you wanted to make changes to the h1 tag here, I'm sorry, the h1 tag here that says my page, and let's say you wanted to change this, what you can do is you can select document and then move your cursor towards this h1 node and make changes to the content. So we'll go into the detail on how we can do this. Right, so we'll cover how to apply JS to DOM in session 4, as well as we'll cover in depth in all of our 3 projects. So what is JavaScript and how does it work? Right, so JavaScript is a programming language. I'm sure some of you might be already aware of what JavaScript is, but JavaScript has been around since the early 90s, but its potential wasn't fully realized until the late 90s. And right now we are seeing everywhere on the web browsers that JavaScript is being used heavily. So think of your Google Maps, for example, that you open on your web browser. The entire content is loaded by JavaScript. The entire navigation that you do onto this Google Maps application is being handled by JavaScript. So it's a very powerful language that you can learn. I'm not going to read this definition here. You can read it, but it's always best to learn something rather than reading it. So let's move ahead. So what are JavaScript frameworks? So yeah, like I said before, when I made distinction between libraries and frameworks, frameworks are a collection, like a scaffold that is given to you by other people that you may build on top of it. Frameworks are particularly important if you're building a very large application. So for example, let's consider Google Maps, right? So Google Maps can be built by using a framework that will be able to handle um, the key elements of the map, right? So one thing is you have to draw the map onto the canvas. So you have a canvas element that is being loaded every time you go to Google Maps, and you have to manipulate that canvas element, make changes to it as the user moves their cursor along, right? So a framework is a better tool to build such a vast application. So here are key examples of frameworks. Um, we have few courses on some of these frameworks that I encourage you to check out. But before you jump onto frameworks, it is always best to cover JavaScript thoroughly. All right, so set up an installation. So number one thing, like I mentioned before, make sure you are working on a computer and not on a tablet or a mobile device. Make sure you have Visual Studio Code installed. You can use any code editor that you want, but I highly recommend using Visual Studio Code. It will be easier to follow along with me because I'll be using Visual Studio Code, as well as install a good web browser like Google Chrome. The reason I say Google Chrome, you can use any browser you want, but the reason I say Google Chrome is because they provide very excellent development tools, and we will be playing with development tools a lot here. So here are the few resources that you can find to install these applications, depending on what operating system you're using. So this is currently my setup. I'll be using Mac OS operating system, a Google Chrome version of 80, and code editor of Visual Studio Code. So keep in mind there will be improvements from time to time on these tools, and make sure you are able to adjust when there are changes to be made. All right, so what we did so far. So we understood the basic course structure that we're going to follow for this entire course. We are going to be learning the fundamentals of JavaScript. As I said before, you have to focus more on the fundamentals and not on the frameworks. You have to make sure that you practice, practice, and practice.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
And it's always best to learn something practically than reading just the definitions. Definitions do us no good in the world of programming. So in the next session, what we'll do is we'll cover some of the fundamentals of JavaScript programming. You may or may not be familiar with most of these, but we will go through all of them. So here are a few more JavaScript courses that you may take a look at, but I highly recommend you finish this course before you take any of these courses. This is a follow-up course. This is a much more advanced level of JavaScript, where we also cover a little bit of jQuery, that's a JavaScript library, JSON, that is a way you can collect and send data between two applications, and Ajax, a way you can call on to the backend server to get more information from the database. Alright, so this has been fun. I'll see you in the next session. Bye-bye. Alright, welcome back guys to the Introduction to JavaScript course. Good to have you here. Let's get started. Alright, who am I? I'm Kaustubh, you can call me KG. I'll be teaching you session 2 of the Introduction to JavaScript today. Before we move ahead, let's look at the session outline. We will be covering fundamentals of programming. We will be covering variables, expressions, and learn a few data types that JavaScript provides us. We will also cover this. Oh, my mistake. We'll also cover this, which is super important in the JavaScript environment to understand. And we'll also cover the strict mode. So let's go ahead. Again, if you have not taken HTML CSS course before, I'm going to strongly encourage you to take them before, because we will be dealing with HTML and DOM from session 4 onwards heavily. So I highly recommend you take these courses. Alright, so let's do a recap of the previous session. So in the previous session, we learned the difference between being a web developer and a web designer, and we learned about setting up the system as well. Hopefully you guys have installed Google Chrome browser and Visual Studio Code editor. So if you have all of those tools installed, let's begin. Alright, so fundamentals of programming. Okay, over the years, I have come to the conclusion that most novice programmers make a mistake of not understanding and absorbing the fundamentals of programming, but they make a mistake of jumping directly to build projects. Don't get me wrong, I'm also guilty of doing that, especially for new technologies that I've been trying to learn. For example, blockchain. I've been trying to learn blockchain for about a few months now, 5 or 6 months now actually, and my first impulse is to directly start coding and start working on the project, which is a bad idea. You have to complete the fundamentals first. We need to take the first principles approach and understand the fundamentals of any concept that we want to master. So if you're not aware of first principles, I strongly recommend you check it on Google. Having said that, let's begin. So the first thing we are going to understand is what are expressions in JavaScript. So expression is any valid unit of code that resolves to a value. So if you look at this example right here, it says 300 greater than 19. Is it true or false? It's true, right? So this expression will resolve to a Boolean value of true. Now expressions can be further categorized into arithmetic, logical, string, and so on. What kind of expression do you think this is? Okay, so if you guessed it right, congratulations. If you guessed it wrong, it's fine, we are still learning here. The example that we saw here is of category logical. Okay, so now the task for you is to come up with an arithmetic expression. We dealt with logical. You have to come up with an arithmetic expression of your own. I'll give you one example, that is 3 plus 4 equals 7. That is an arithmetic expression with the plus operator to add two numbers. Now you have to come up with different arithmetic expressions of your own. All right, moving ahead. Semicolons. So semicolons are used to denote the end of expression. So like in the English language, you have full stop, right? For ending an expression in JavaScript, use semicolon. They're not mandatory in JavaScript like they are mandatory in some of the programming languages like C or C++, but it's a good practice to end your expressions with semicolons in them. All right, literals. Okay, literal is a value that is written in a source code. So like, for example, if I say a number or string or a Boolean value, that will be a literal that is being added into the source code. All right, moving ahead. Variables. Now this is the most important aspect of learning the fundamentals of programming. I bet you have taken algebra in your high school where you solved for the value of x or y. Remember what x and y were? They were variables, right? So in JavaScript you also have variables to store the data values. So for example, you see here it says var length equal to 100. The var stands for variable, and var, I call it var, some call it var, it's fine. You can call it either one of those. I say var length equal to 100. That means the variable length 100 stores the value of 100. Let's move ahead. You'll understand the variables a bit more clearly. So naming a variable. Now this is an important aspect. The variable name has to be case sensitive. So if you go back and looked at this example, the variable length, the L is small case, and all of the variables need to start with the small case alphabet. A new variable should have a unique name. It should not be repeated in the code. A variable can start with dollar or underscore, but they should not start with any different literals. They can start with letters, of course. So you have to avoid using the reserved words. So a reserved word can be, for example, this. A reserved word can be if or else. We are not allowed to use those words while declaring a variable. And for the purpose of maintaining the clarity and understanding clearly for other programmers that will be working with you, it's best if you name them according to what value they're going to hold. So if you look at this example right here, this is holding a value of length. So it's better to call this variable length rather than width, or just calling this L or W. Okay, so clarity is important. So what values can be stored in variable? Now in here, when you first create a variable, it does not have a value. Okay, it is undefined. Remember this, because I personally have made these mistakes while learning programming when I was in high school. And if you don't assign a variable a value, you might think it's 0 or null, but it's actually not. It's actually garbage. But in JavaScript, you have something called undefined. And whenever you declare a variable but don't assign any value to it, it's always undefined. So let us go ahead and check this out actually. Let me open up a new window here, and we'll go to JS Fiddle. So for people who are not aware with JS Fiddle is a online tool where we can run JavaScript, and I'll be using the console right here. So let's say if we had var a and just did this, and I wanted to print this out. So for printing it out, I'm going to be using console.log. Don't worry, you'll cover console.log in the later slides. But let's say if you wanted to print this a out, what do you think the value will be? Let me run this. Now this will be loaded inside the console, so let me expand the console, and you see right here it's undefined. I can call this anything that I want. I can call this apple, and I'll say apple. It will still return undefined. Okay, so it needs to hold onto something. So if I say apple, and if I use this and say, let's say Apple has a MacBook, so I'll say MacBook and print this out, it will give the value of Apple variable. Okay, so let's go back. Variables can hold different types of data. So if we go back in here, now the variable Apple is holding a data type of string. Again, we'll cover string in detail in the later slides, but the point I'm trying to make is a variable can hold any type of data. So it can be either a number, it can be a string, it can be a boolean. Okay. The next thing is the value of a variable can change over time. So we already experienced this right now. So the Apple was undefined first, now it became MacBook. And let's say if I log this out here, and now here I change the value of Apple to, let's say, banana. Who cares? Let's try banana. So let's say console.log apple, and the first value it shows me is MacBook, and the second value it shows me is banana. That means the value of Apple changed over time, and that's what this point is trying to illustrate. Okay, moving ahead. Types. Okay, to be able to operate on variables, we need to understand what type of data they're holding. So in this example right here, you see on the screen, it says var length equal to 10. So when we assign it to 10, that means the data that the length variable is holding is of type number. Now if we go back to our example right here, the variable apple is holding the type of data string. If I assign this to a number, then it will hold the value, hold the type of number right here. Okay, moving ahead. So these are the data types that you need to be aware of. So first one is obviously the string. So in our case of Apple and MacBook, MacBook is a string. Number is, again, any number. It can be an integer, it can be a floating point. Boolean is of course true or false. Undefined is something that is not defined. It's usually a garbage number or a garbage value. And null is simply something that is empty. Okay, let's move ahead. Okay, so object is also one of the data types of JavaScript. It is of type key and value pair.
Thanks for watching. Please like and share this video.
So I believe you might have learned this in HTML5 when learning local storage. Local storage is an object that holds key value pairs. If not, we'll again revisit this in one of our projects, the local storage. But again, object holds the key value pairs. So if you want to look at an example, let's go back. Let's clear this out. I'll create a object of person, and this is how we define it. So we'll have a first name. So this is the key, and the value is, let's say, John. The second item, the second key that I want to add here is last name, and I'll say Doe. And you want to give it give another property, let's say age. Say John is 50, and yeah, I think this is it. This is fine. So let's run this. Nothing happens because we did not log this out. So let's log this out. So we'll say log person and run this. So we got a response of the object that is stored in the variable person. Okay, so if you want to access the individual property, we just have to call them by key. So what you can do is you can say console.log and use the dot operator to access it. So I say dot, and I'll say first name. And let me run this. So the first name that is stored in here is John, and this is the response that I get of John. Excellent. Moving back to the slides. Strings. So strings is anything that is enclosed in double quotes. So if you go back, John is of type string, but let us go back and go with a much more simpler example. So we'll say var say string equals my name is John Doe, and let me log this out again. Alright, so var string str, that stands for string, and the value of it is enclosed in double quotes. So this is a value of type string. If this were without double quotes, it would give me an error. Alright, look at here. It says uncaught syntax error. Okay, so let me give in one quick task. So let's say I say 77 here, and I added double quotes, and we run this. It says 77. What happens if I add the 77 as a string with number 77? What happens in that case? So let's say var result equals 77 plus string, and instead of logging out the string, we will log out result. What do you think will be the result of this? It says 7777. So the reason this happens is because this is a string and this is a number, but it converted, or it concatenated everything as one string. Alright, so moving back to the slides. Again, same thing I explained before. You can use concatenation to mix strings and numbers. When you do this, JavaScript will treat number like a string. So in this case, you have number of fruits equal to 6, type of fruit equal to banana, and all the fruit equal to I have number of fruit plus type of fruit. Right? So it will create one whole string. Try this out on JS Fiddle before moving on to the next slide. All right, arrays. So arrays is one of the another data type where you can it's not actually a data type, it's a special variable that can hold multiple values at a time. So the way to define an array is, as you can see here, let us try something with arrays. So let's say for array equals, and we'll add some values. And we'll log this out. So we get a response of multiple values that are stored inside this array for this variable ARR. So array is nothing but a variable that stores multiple values. All right. Moving back on to the slides. All right, like I said, you'll be looking at console again. So the console object provides access to the browser's debugging console. So if you go back and open up a new tab, and let me go to the developer tools by right-clicking anywhere on the page and selecting the inspect option. If I select the console tab here, this is the console that we're talking about that exists in the browser window. So let me clear this up. So this is the console object, and it provides me multiple methods on top of that object. So I can say console dot, and these are the functions that I can run on this console object. So let's say I want to run the log, and I want to pass in something. I'll say hi there, and press enter. It will return hi there. Okay. So the reason we use console object is to access the browser's console and display any message that we want to display over here. So usually we use it to log the errors or log any important information that can be used by the developers. Okay, so let's move back. All right, so comments. So the way we handle comments in JavaScript is by using single line and multi-line. So let's look at an example of each one of these. So if I say single line comment, so this is an array, and the multi-line comment can be this is a multi-line comment. All right, and if you run this, this won't be interpreted by the JavaScript runtime, and it won't show on the log. Okay, so this is just a way of adding comments onto your code for other developers to understand. Okay, let's move ahead. All right, so in this session we covered the basics of programming. We covered variables, types, expressions, arrays, strings, and objects, and much more. I hope you enjoyed it. We will need to practice these fundamentals until we get better at grasping them. In the next session, we'll continue our journey of learning the fundamentals by covering conditional statements, loops, and functions. All right, Thank you for learning with me. See you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, welcome back guys to Introduction to JavaScript course. Good to have you here. Who am I? I'm Kaustup, but you can call me KG. I'll be teaching you session 3 of Introduction to JavaScript today. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. We will continue our journey of learning the fundamentals of JavaScript programming in this session. We will learn conditional statements, loops, and functions. Again, as a reminder, if you have not taken HTML and CSS courses before, I'm going to strongly encourage you to do that because we will be dealing with HTML and DOM, that is the Document Object Model, from session 4 onwards. In the previous session, we started with learning the fundamentals of programming by understanding expressions, literals, variables, data types, arrays, strings, and so on. Now we will continue to see how we can use these with conditional statements, loops, and functions. So, conditional statements. Conditional statements allow us to set up the conditions to be true or false for any given case. So let's look at the literal definition of conditional statement. A conditional statement are features of programming language which perform different computations or actions depending on whether a programmer specified Boolean condition evaluates to be true or false. So these are pretty standard across multiple programming languages. There are very few programming languages which do not have conditional statements. So let's look at a few conditional statements. So the most common conditional statement that you will come across is the if and else block. Okay, so in the if is a keyword. So keyword followed by two parentheses, and within those parentheses, you check if the value specified is true or false. Okay, if the value specified in this if statement is true, then the code will execute within that block. And if not, then it will move on to the else block. Same way, if you have to check multiple conditions, you can use else if. So if the first condition is set to be false, then you can move on to the second condition. You can check the second condition. If that does not work out, then you can always move into the else block. Another form of conditional statement is a switch case where you have multiple options to check. So we will cover both of these by looking at few examples. Before we do that, we have to make sure we understand the comparison operators. So the difference between equal to, double equal to, and triple equal to, right? So this is a common mistake that people make that we'll see how they make it. We also have not equal, not identical, less than, greater than, less than equal to, greater than equal to. So we will actually cover all if not most of the scenarios in our examples. Okay, so the most important thing you have to understand is you don't have to mix up equal to, double equal to, and triple equal to. Let me go back to Visual Studio Code, or rather I'll go back to the Google Chrome and show you how this works. So let me open up Google Chrome. Let me open up a new window. Let me go to the developer tools. Clear out the console. Okay. So what do you think is a value for this statement? It's true. It's true, right? It makes sense because 77 is same as 77. But what if I added a string in here? So let's say I added 77 in a string format. It still says true. And now this is actually wrong. We don't want to do this. So if you want to check strictly for the type of the literal, then we have to make sure that we use a triple equal to, because it will check the type too. So now it says false here. But what if I said 77 triple equal to 77? It says true. So we have to make sure we enter always triple equal to if we have to check the type. And this is the most common mistake people make while writing the if statements.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
So we have logical operators. So if you want to check two conditions in one single statement, we can use these logical operators, and, or not. Again, we will explore these when we write the code. Okay, let's write the code. I'm going to go to JS Fiddle and write all my code here. I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to clear the console as well. And I'm going to change the orientation of this. Okay, let me again clear this out. All right, so what we want to do is to understand how if and else blocks work. So for this, let's consider a use case. So let's consider a student gets marks between a range of, let's say, 40 to 90, and based on how much marks he gets, we are going to give him a grade. So let's say let's write this out first. So let's say if marks are more than 90, that means he gets grade 8. I cannot make this bigger. Okay, here we go. If marks are more than 80 but less than 90, we give them grade B. Okay, if marks are more than, let's say, 60 but less than 80, that's grade C. And let's say marks less than 60, we consider him failed. Okay, so if you have to check for each and every condition, how would you do it? So let's first create a variable to hold our marks. So we'll say variable marks equal to, that's for testing purpose. Let's write out some marks here. Now we have to write an if statement. So we'll say if marks are greater than 90, we say so grade A. We have else if marks are greater than 80 but now in here we have to check two conditions. Marks are greater than 80 but they should be less than 90, so we'll use a logical AND here. So logical AND and marks less than 90. Okay, so for this we are putting in grade B. Same thing for C and D. Okay, so the next thing is marks are greater than 60. So marks are greater than 60 but less than 80. So that's grade C. And in here we just have to check for one condition, that is marks are less than 60. So I can just remove this. And we say fail. All right, so now let's run this and we will see. So we get a grade A, right? So let's say marks are 75. We get a grade C. Okay. What if we get marks like, let's say 100, what would be the use case in here? Again, you get grade A because we haven't specified the upper limit for the marks, but it's fine. Now we have to check for something really interesting. So what if a student gets marks as equal to 60? What happens then? So let's check it out. We get grade C, right? But we said that marks are less than 60, so that's why we grade C. But what if we say marks are equal to 80? Yeah, we don't get anything, right? So why is the reason for that? Because we haven't checked if the marks are greater than equal to, right? So it's always best if we check equal to. So if it's 80, up until 80, it's grade B. So in this case too, up until 90, it's grade A. Up until 60, it's grade C. If it's less than 60, then fail. So now let's run this. Now we get a grade B. Okay, so this is how an if and else if blocks work. If you were to check for something like negative, like minus, in that case, we can always write a else statement in here. So let's say else console.log invalid marks. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our slides. Okay, before we begin loops, let me go back and quickly work on our switch statement. So we talked about switch, but we haven't covered in an example. So let's work that out first. So let me clear this up again. Let me clear the console. All right, so in this case, we have to check. We have 4 states, and we have to check which state has the user selected. Okay, so let's say we have 4 states. So we have Illinois, we have New York, California, and let's say Arizona. Okay. In this case, we can use a switch case. So let's first write a variable called state. We'll assign it to, let's say, New York. Okay. And we can check for each and every condition. So we'll say switch state, and we will check for conditions. So in this case, we have to write case. For each case, we are checking it. So case, let's say, Illinois, console.log, and we say selected. Okay, we have to write it for every case in here. So this is Illinois. We'll have New York. Then we have California. And let's write for Arizona. Okay, now this is fine, but for each one of them, so let's say which case should be executed here. Okay, so let's run this and see. So it says New York is selected, California is selected, Arizona is selected. So there's obviously a bug in here. I'll tell you what the bug is, but you notice Illinois is not selected. You know why? Because the state is not Illinois, right? Let's just type in Illinois here. And let's run this. All of the states are selected. Now, the obvious bug in here is we have to break the loop when we figure out the best use case. So let's say if I type in Arizona, it will just show Arizona. It just shows Arizona because these conditions are not true, right? So once we are done by checking the case, we have to break in. So there's the break keyword that comes in handy. And you can use this for all of the loops. Otherwise, the loops can go into an infinite mode. Okay, so I'm gonna type in break, and I'm gonna run. It says Arizona, great. Let's now check New York again. We should only get New York now, not the other ones. So I say run, and I just get New York. Let me clear this out first. Let's check out California. Say run, and I get only California. I don't get Arizona because I added a break in here. Now, what if we add some other state, let's say like Kentucky? What happens then? Nothing happens because we need to specify this condition that if the state is not within these four, we have to write a default case. So we have to write a default, and we'll say console.log, say wrong state selected, and we write a break in here too. We don't have to write a break in here, but it's always good practice. So let's run this. It says wrong state selected. What if we add Wisconsin? We don't have a condition of Wisconsin in here, so it will again log out the condition, the statement in the default condition. So we say wrong state selected. So this is how a switch block works, a switch statement works. Let's go back and look at loops. Okay, so this is a literal definition of loop. Loop is a computer program that keeps on repeating itself until a specified condition is reached. So for example, let's say you have your goals, right? So you want to achieve something in life and you're working hard towards it. And unless and until you achieve that goal, you'll be repeating the same behaviors again and again and again and again. That's the easiest example of a loop. Okay. So these are the three kinds of loop. One is the for loop that we will actually see through code later on. The next ones are while and do while. So while loop is pretty interesting. We write a block of code if the condition is true, and until the condition is true, the loop keeps on executing. Do while is something a bit similar, but in case of while, if the condition is false, we won't go inside the while block. But in case of do while, we'll run the block at least once, even if the condition is false. Okay. So let's go back and see how this works. So let me clear this out. Clear the console as well. So let me write a while loop in here. I'll say variable I equals 10. This is the simplest example you can find, but the while loops in your program can become much more complicated as you start programming. So we'll start with the basic one first. So we'll say while, and in this condition we will check, let's say, if I is greater than 10. Okay, what happens if I say console.log and log out I? What if I run this? I'm not going to run this, but just I want you to think for a while. What will happen in here? What will happen is the I, that is 10. Oh, I'm sorry, I just put in the wrong expression. Okay, so the condition I'm checking is I is greater than 1. Okay, so what will happen in this block? I just want you to think for a second. What can be the possible outcome by running this? It will actually go in an infinite loop, okay? Because I will always be greater than 1. So 10 will always be greater than 1. That's why it will go in an infinite loop. So we have to add a break statement here, right? But I'm not going to do that. What I want to do is I want to reduce the value of I for by 1 every time the loop runs. So I'll say I minus minus. Okay, and let me run this.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Now I get a value here. Say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. But I don't get 1 because it says I is greater than 1. It's not greater than equal to. If I was say equal to, it would give me 1 as well. Okay, so the loop has run 10 times and it has always checked if I is greater than equal to 1. Right, so if it were like let's say 20, we get 20. Okay, so we check the Boolean value of anything that is in here if it's a true or false, and we run the loop. At the moment it becomes false, we stop running. Okay, and there are certain times when the value always is true, and the loop may run on forever and forever. So that's what creates an infinite loop. Okay, so this was while statement. Let's write do while. So let me write an example. Let me create an array. So I'll say var array equals let's say 2, 45, 9, and let me loop through this array. Okay, so what I will do is I want anything that is I want all of the values from this array. Okay, so what I will do is I will say variable I equals 0. The reason I said 0 is because array starts from 0, right? So the position of 2 is at the 0th position, 11 is at the first position, 45 is at the second position, and 9 is at the third position. So I want to check if, like for each and every position in an array, I want to check until the 4th position and log the elements from until 0 to 3. Okay, so what I will do is I will say do, and inside I'll write my expressions, but I'll say while, and I will say I less than 4. So for I less than 4, I will do is console.log array and the position of I. So the I right now is 0, right? So for 0th position, I'm going to get 2. For the first position, I'm going to get 11. For the second position, I'm going to get 45. For the third position, I'm going to get 9. But I'm not going to go to the 4th position because this condition will return false. All right, so let's run this and see how it works. Oops, I think I missed something. I have to move this pointer here. So I'll just say I++. Let me run this. Yeah, I think I ran that before, so it went into an infinite loop. Let me quickly reload the page. To clear the console, paste it out and run this again. And here you go, I get all the positions here. Since I didn't run the I++, I didn't write the I++, the loop went into an infinite mode. So every time this always will remain true, and this will always remain true because I is 0, and 0 will always be less than 4. So it became an infinite loop. Okay. So now let's look at a for loop. Now for loop is a bit more interesting, right? So if you want to do for, you have to write a for keyword, and it takes three statements in here. One is the variable declaration, one is the condition, and one is the counter, right? So you move the reference of the loop ahead or behind. So let's say I would say int, not int, I don't need int. So let's say var I equals 10, I less than 10. Say I less than equal to 100 and I plus plus. Okay, in this say I'll log I. What do you think the value will be? So I'll log every number from 10 until 100. That's what will happen, because what will happen is the initial value of I is 10 right now, but once we get into the loop, this won't matter anymore, and what will happen is for every time the loop is run, we'll run an I plus plus and we'll log out the value of I, right? So let's run this, and you see that's what happens. So we logged out every value, right? So let's say if this were 100 and say greater than equal to 10, and instead of adding and say minus, and let's run this. So we log every number from 100 to 10 in the reverse order. This is how for loop works. All right, so functions. So functions is a group of reusable code that can be called anywhere in the program. So let's think of it this way. You have certain logic that you need to keep on executing again and again and again, and you don't want to write it every time you want to use it. So what you can do is you can write this block of code and reuse it wherever you want in the program. You can even have it in different files or on different server if you want, right? So these are short modular codes that can be reused, and they make the life of programmers very easy. So a good example of a function is, let's say you're building a calculator, okay, a simple calculator. You're adding two numbers, you're subtracting two numbers, or you're multiplying, or you're dividing. In each of these operations, you can have a function for each of these different operations. So the way we would do it, let's look at how we can do this. So a function is written by dividing the function keyword and the function name. So let's say in our case we do add, and in here we'll have two variables. We'll say variable A equals 10, variable B equals 20, and let's have a variable for result. Oh, not 10 plus 20, but I want to add A plus B, and I want to log this out. No, my mistake. Okay, so I've written this function. Now I have to call this function somewhere. So I'll just say add. Okay, and I will run it, and I get 30. So this is how we write a function. So if you were to take two numbers from the user and perform some operations and return the result, and you have, let's say if you have different users who are adding different numbers, then in that case this logic, the logic that you have written, can be written only once, and we can reuse it for each and every user and each and every value that the user provides. Okay, so it makes our life considerably easier. Built-in functions. So we'll cover some built-in functions on the number, string, and object data types. So we will be covering classes and constructors. So classes are special functions in JavaScript. You can use the same expressions to define a class as you would use to define a function in JavaScript. The classes aren't directly used by program, but by creating objects, you can use the objects to access the class. These objects are used to achieve different tasks that you desire in the program. So in simplest terms, classes are used to create objects. Let's look at a simple example real quickly. Let me open up Visual Studio Code. Actually, I will go to the JS Fiddle. And I'm going to clear this out from the last example. Let me clear this out. So let's take an example of pets. If we were to store information about all our pets, how would I do it, right? Let's say I have 3 dogs and 2 cats. How would I define this information inside the program? Let's consider dog for a moment. What are the properties of my dogs, right? They have, first of all, let's write in what they have. They have name. They have age. They have breed. And they have color. Now, what do dogs normally like to do? So, what do they do? Dogs like to run. They like to bark. They can fetch things, and they like to jump. Okay, so to have this information of dogs, I'll create objects to store this information, but above properties are similar to all dogs, right? So we create an object for each dog, and then we can update the properties and methods for this object. Let's actually write some code to understand this better. I'm going to comment this out. So comment this out real quick. And let me make some space here. Alright, like I mentioned earlier, you can use the same expression to define a class as you'd use to define a function in JavaScript. We create a class by using the class keyword followed by the name of the class we want to create. So in this case, we'll say class dog. Okay, this is a class definition. Now every class has an initializer function called a constructor, and it is run only once during the life of the objects when the object is created. So let's define this constructor inside the class. So let me make some space here. I'll say constructor, and I'll define a function. So let me actually log something out and show you something real quick. Log this out. I'll say hello from the constructor. Okay, now let's create an object and see the constructor in action. So the way we create an object is we type in a variable, we give it a name, so I'll say dog1, and we create an instance of this dog right here. So we want to create a new instance of this, so I'm going to say new dog, and I'm going to follow it by parentheses because I want to create a new instance. So I'm going to be running this constructor right here. So if I save this, I'm going to see hello from the constructor. What this means is that the dog1 object has been initialized for the class dog. Okay, now that we have understood what the constructor does, let's add the properties that all dogs have in common. We'll add this inside the constructor. So we will say in here, we'll say this dot name and the value. So let's for now say Tommy. Okay, and let's add the other properties. Let's say age. So let's say Tommy is 1 year old. Say Tommy is of the breed golden retriever. I'm just going to use the single quotes here instead of double quotes. I don't like using double quotes. I'm going to be using this dot color. So color is obviously, let's say, golden. Okay, this here refers to the object that is being created by the class. So let's save this and check the console now.
Thanks for watching. Please like and share this video.
And let's actually log this out. Let's log something out right here real quick. So in this case, I will log out dog1. So I get the value for dog1, right? We see all the properties for dog1. So now if you create instance for a second dog, say dog2, say var dog2, and create a new instance. In this case, what do you think will be the answer? Let me save this, and I get the same dog information. But what if the dog2 had different properties, right? So let's say if it were a black Labrador, we still get the same information as dog1, which means the age, breed, color will not match with dog2's properties. So we need to have the user properties to be user defined, then hard code them inside the constructor of our class. So to do this, you need to pass in the properties of every dog at the instance creation. So we'll have to do something like this. So for dog2, we have to pass in something right here. So we'll have to say Max. The name is Max. We have to pass in the age. We have to pass in the breed. So let's say it's a black Labrador. And let's say the color is black. Okay. Now to make sure that this object is created with these properties, we need to make changes to our constructor method, because if you see, the constructor method has the values hard-coded. We need this method to accept arguments or parameters. So let's just say name, age, breed, and color. So these are the same values that I've entered right here, right? And instead of putting in the hard-coded values, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say name, age. I'm going to remove this and say breed, and I'm going to remove this and say color. There we go. Now let's save this and run. Okay, I get an error here. What kind of error am I getting? I'm getting error because this is empty. So let me quickly add here the name, Tommy. Let's say the age is 1. It's oh, these are strings, by the way. That's one of the errors that I'm getting, I think. So I'm going to add golden retriever, and the color is, let's say, golden, and I'm going to just save it. Alright, I just have dog1 logged out. Let me log out the dog2 as well. I'll say dog2, save it. Now I get the 2 information. That's great. Now let's say for the instance method we define them inside the class. Okay, so let's say we want to make the dogs go for a run, bark, fetch, or jump. So we can write functions. So let's say I'm going to write a function right inside this class. So I'm going to say function run, and in here I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say the name of the dog. So this dot name plus is running. Wait. Oh, I don't need to use a function right here, the function keyword, because it's a method from within the class. So I don't need to do that. So let me just quickly log this out. Instead of dog1 and dog2, let's say console.log we don't need to log this out because we already have a console.log inside the run. So I'm just gonna say let the dog1 run. So let's Tommy run. Let the Tommy run. So let's say dog1.run, and I'm going to just save it, and it says Tommy's running. Okay, I need a space in here. Alright, great, Tommy's running. So if I wanted to make sure to make the max run, so I would say dog2.run, max is running. So great, this is what classes and constructors are. So let's have a quick overview of new JavaScript functions. So set timeout. Set timeout calls a function or evaluates an expression after a specified number of milliseconds. So one of the examples is, let me quickly remove this. Oops. Let me quickly remove this code. Oh, my mistake. We clear out the console. And a good example of set timeout will be, so let's say set timeout. And inside I'm going to pass in a function with a console.log hello. And I'm going to run it after 3000 milliseconds. So if I save this, I get this after 3 seconds, right? So if I run this, see how much time it takes for this to log out. There it is. So the next method that we want to look at is set interval. Set interval method calls a function or evaluates an expression at specified intervals. So again, it's in milliseconds. So let's say if you want to display the time, so what I will do is, so you want to display the clock. This is a very interesting use case, by the way. So let's say I'll declare a variable. I'll say my variable equals set interval, and I'm going to pass in a function that I haven't not created yet, but I'm going to just call it time, and I'm going to display it every 1 second. Right, so let me write this function real quickly. So I'll say function of time, and inside this I have to create a date object. So I will just say variable d equals new date object, and I'm going to get the local time in the local string format. So I'm going to say variable time equals d.to locale string, and I'm just going to log this out. So I'm going to say console.log and t, and I'm going to just run this. So you see right here, I get the time. Excellent. Callbacks. In simple terms, a callback is a function that is to be executed after another function has finished executing, hence the term callback. Let's look at some regular functions first. So I have two functions, function first and function second, and I call them right after I define them. So now, as you would expect, let me first run this real quick. So as you would expect, the function first is executed first and function second is executed second. But what if first function contains some sort of code that can be executed immediately? For example, an API request where we have to send the request and then wait for a response. JavaScript runs code sequentially in top-down order. However, there are some cases that code must run after something else has happened and not sequentially. This is called asynchronous programming. Callbacks make sure that a function is not going to be run before a task is completed, but will run right after the task is completed. So in JavaScript, the way to create a callback function is to pass it as a parameter to another function. and then to call it back right after something has happened or some task has been completed. So let us see how this works. We'll be using the set timeout method we learned a while ago. So let me write this real quick. So I'll say constant message and create a function. I'll log something out. Okay, console. And I'm going to run this function after, let's say 5 seconds. Okay, and let me write the set timeout. And in here, I'm going to pass this function right here. So message, and execute it after 5,000 milliseconds. So if I run this, so it appears after 5 seconds. The message is being called after something has happened. So after 5 seconds has passed, for example, in this example, but not before. So the message function is simply an example of a callback function. Okay, so let us go back. So promises. Promises are very important in JavaScript. Make sure you understand this very thoroughly, because you will be using this in advanced JavaScript, and especially in various JavaScript frameworks such as Node.js, as well as the front-end frameworks such as Angular. Promise is commonly defined as a proxy for a value that will eventually become available. So imagine you're a kid and your dad promises you that he will take you camping next week. So now you don't know if he'll go to the camping. Your dad can take you camping, or he might not take you camping because he might be busy, right? So that's a promise. A promise has 3 states. So let me go back in here real quick and open up the console. So a promise has 3 states. The first is pending. The next one is fulfilled. And the last one is rejected. Okay, so pending is that you don't know if you'll go to camping. Fulfilled means your dad takes you to camping because he's not busy. Okay, the not busy is a condition that we have to check. The rejected, that means your dad does not take you to camping because he's busy, right? So let's write some code for this. Let's codify this. So I'll just clear this console out, and I'll declare a variable to see if dad is busy. So I'll say is dad busy. So currently he's not busy. And let me create a new promise. So this is how you create a new promise. I'll declare a variable, take me camping, and this will either be fulfilled or not fulfilled. Will take me camping, this promise. So I'll say new promise, and inside this we pass in a function. So I'll say function resolve reject. Okay, so just ignore this, I just accidentally pressed enter right here. In this we have to see if dad is busy. So I'll say if dad is busy. So I'll say if dad is not busy, and in here I'm going to, if dad is not busy, then we are going camping, right? So I'll create a object for camping which will have all the information about camping. So I'll say where we are going. So let's say we are going into the state of Wisconsin. The time, say we are going at 10 a.m. The day, say we're going on Sunday, and that is it. Now, since that is not busy, we are definitely going to camping. So I'm just going to resolve this request. That means the request has been fulfilled.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
So resolve camping. So that means the request has been fulfilled. And if that is busy, then we have to give a reason because that is busy. So I'll just say var reason equals new error. I'm just going to throw an error, and the reason is that is busy. And I'm going to reject this with the reason. So which means we are not going to camping. Okay. So this is how we create a promise. And if I now see if will that take me camping, the promise is resolved because dad is not busy, and that's why we're going, right? But what if dad is busy? So if I say and I create this again, then I get an error. I get an error saying that dad is busy, so we are not going camping today. Great. Let's go back. Async and await is special syntax to work with promises in a much more easier fashion. This is a way of defining the promises and handling the reject and resolve. You won't be covering this in detail because this is still an introduction to JavaScript, but as we move on to the advanced level, we'll definitely go in detail for async and await. So closure. A closure is a function that has access to its outer function scope even after the outer function has returned. Okay, so what does that mean? So let me go back here real quick, clear this out, and explain what this means. So let us say we declare a variable, and I say world. In here, I will say I'll declare a function called hello. I'll say hello, and in here, let me log out. Now, what closure means is closure is a function that has access to its outer function scope even after the outer function has returned. So that means we have access to the outer scope, right? So the outer scope in this case is variable a, right? So if I just say a and just run this function, so I'll say hello, I got hello world. Great. So arrow functions. Arrow functions are also known as fat arrow functions. They are new and they were introduced in ECMAScript 6. They allow us to write a much more concise syntax for writing the function expressions. They utilize a new token called fat arrow right here. Oh, my mistake. And which makes our code much more concise, and they simplify the function scoping. Okay, so this is your regular function, and this is an arrow function. The good thing about this is we have to write much less code, and it gives us it allows us to achieve developer productivity. So that's it. In this session we have covered promises, callbacks, arrow functions, as well as we have gone over the conditional statements, as well as loops. So this session is very important in terms of working with the project that we'll be covering in the future session. So make sure you understand these concepts very thoroughly, and I will see you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, welcome back, guys. Good to have you here. Welcome to Introduction to JavaScript course. Who am I? I'm Kaustubh, but you can call me KG. I will be teaching you session 4 of Introduction to JavaScript today. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. In this session, we will be exploring Document Object Model. DOM, as it's short for Document Object Model, is a tree structure representation of HTML. It defines the logical structure of the HTML document and the way we can access and manipulate the elements on this tree structure using JavaScript. Again, as a reminder, if you have not taken HTML and CSS courses before, I'm going to strongly encourage you to take them, because from this session onwards, we will be focusing on DOM, and we will be covering them in each of the projects that we'll be working on. In the last session, we covered the conditional statements and loops. We will be using many of these concepts in the projects that we will be working on together. But to work on these projects, we also need to learn how HTML can be accessed and manipulated using JavaScript. So let's begin. So what is DOM? So this is a typical W3C definition that we get for what DOM is. But to explain it simply, DOM is a way we can access the elements on the HTML page. Think of this in terms of visual information tree structure. So what do I mean by that? Let me show you. So this is your typical HTML file. You have the HTML element, the header element, body element, as well as the paragraph element here. And this is represented in a tree structure format. And the way we can access each one of these elements is by using JavaScript. And to access each one of these elements, we have to first access the overall element in which each individual element resides. So that overall object is called document object. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So a document object model is a standard for how we can get, change, add, or delete the HTML elements. Now, once we get these HTML elements, we can make changes to their property, we can add attributes to them, we can also access a few methods on these HTML elements, and we can also listen to key events on these elements and make sure that we add a bit of functionality to our HTML document. So, DOM methods. These are the two most important DOM methods that we'll be looking at. So the first one is getElementById. It is the most common one that you will be working on throughout this course. It is used to get the element by using the ID. So let's say if you have a paragraph element that is on your HTML file and you need to access this, if that element has an attribute of ID, we can access that using JavaScript. In a similar fashion, if we want to get more than one elements, we can use class names, because ID is unique. Remember, you must have learned this in the HTML course. ID is unique, but the class names can be reused again and again. So if you were to access multiple elements, we can use one single class name. So finding the HTML elements. Now imagine if you have 1,000 lines of HTML code and a couple of hundred div tags. If we were to access a particular div tag, how would we do it? For this, there are a few methods that are provided to us which make accessing this specific div tag easier. The easiest way to access a particular div tag is by accessing its ID or class name. When writing in HTML, you usually add a ID or class for that specific element. By using the methods available on the DOM object, we can access these elements by using IDs. So let us go back to Visual Studio Code Editor and we'll see this in action. So I'm going to create a new folder here and I'm going to call this session 4, and I'm going to open up this folder in my Visual Studio Code. Let me create a new file called index.html. Let me close this up, and in here I will add a boilerplate code. Alright, so we already have the doc type, the HTML tag, the header, the body. Now we have to add a few div elements of our own. So let's add a few div elements. So this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So for first, let's give it an ID of, let's say, container. For the second one, let's give a class of test. And for the second one, let's give an ID of, let's say, test2 and a class of test. Okay, now let's write some JavaScript to access these elements. Now the way we can do this is by adding a script tag. So let me add a script tag right below this. Okay, in here what I will do is I will use document dot get element by ID, and we'll access the first element and say container, and I want to see if I get this. So what I will do is I will store this in a variable. Do you remember the concept of variable that we learned in previous sessions? So I will say variable, give it a space. I'm accessing div1, so let's say div1 equal to, and I will assign document.getElementById by ID and container, and I will make sure I log this out. So I will say div1. So let us run this. So I'm going to open up a local host of 5500. Okay, it started at 5501, so let me begin at 5501 and let me go to inspect, and I already have an error, but it's fine. That's a favicon ICO error. But if you look at here, we have a div with an ID of container, and that's from index.html at line 21. So this is the log that has been printed. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to get all the divs with class of test, how would I do that? Let me first create a variable and say divs, and I will access the document and use the get elements by class name, and I will pass in the class name. Let me go back and log this out first, and I will say divs. Now if I open up the console, I should get
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
two console.logs because I have two console.logs. First one is of course the get element by ID, and the second one was get elements by class name. If you notice, we have two elements with the same class name. That's why we get two elements in the log. So we have two elements. We have element 1 and we have element 2. So that's great. Let's go back to our PowerPoint slides. Same way, once we get the access to the element, we can change the HTML attributes for it. So one of the way we can add new HTML elements is we can say element.innerHTML, or we can add a new attribute by saying element.attribute and a new value. If you were to change the styles available on this particular element, we can also add new styles by using element.style.property and define our styles. Right, similar to the properties and the attributes on the elements, we can also have access to the events that these elements are attached to, and based on the trigger of these events, we can make changes to the index.html file. So let's look at a few of these events. So here are a few examples of these events. So one of the most common events is the user click. So when you're browsing on the web page, you click on different aspects of the HTML document, like for example a button. That is an event that is being registered, and based on that event we make decision on how to present changes onto the HTML file. One of the other event is to notice when the complete web page has loaded. One of the event is to see if the image has been loaded, and the rest are the few elements that you can see right from the point number 4 to point number 6, where you can see if the mouse is moving, mouse as in the cursor that is hovering over different elements. We can make sure that the element changes color when the mouse is hovering over it. We can also have the input field changed, right? So if you have noticed this, when you're filling out a form, when you click on an input element, you get a blue colored border for that specific element. That is by triggering of the event of bringing that element to focus. So these are certain events that we will be talking about and discussing in this session, as well as most importantly in the projects that we'll be covering. So these are the key event listeners that we add to the HTML element. So one of them is on click, one is on load, one is on change, one is mouse over, and one is mouse down. These are just a few of them. There are a lot of events that you can attach to an element. I have not covered all of them, but I highly recommend you check few resources that I have provided at the end of this session. So let's actually code this and see how this will look. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code Editor. Before I do anything, let me add a button element here real quick. I will say click me, and let me add an ID of click button. Okay, now let me go back inside the JavaScript. Let me create a variable to store this button. I will say document.getElementById, and we have click button. I believe the B of the button is capital. Now let me add a add event listener method to this element. So I will say button.add event listener, and the event that we are listening for is click. Okay, once you register click, you want to run a function. So let me write a function name. I haven't defined this function yet, but let's say click button function. Now let me define this click button. So I'll say click button, and inside here I will add a console.log and say button is clicked. Save it and see if this works. Looks like the application is already running. So let me go back here. Let me open this up at port 5501 and go to developer tools, to the console, and when we click on this button, it says button is clicked. So it looks like the event is being registered. Okay, so that's great. Now if you want to just register the event itself, what we can do is we can log the event out. So let's remove that button is clicked and add an event. Let's pass in E for event, and see how this looks. So let me click on this again, and you can see the entire event is being logged. So expand this, you get all the properties for this event. Now imagine the possibilities of what you can do with this event. We will be covering this in more detail in project 3, but till then, make sure you understand the events and how they are attached to the elements and how we can use JavaScript to manipulate them. Great, so let's go back to the slides. Alright, I believe this concludes the session, but before we do that, let's do a quick recap of what we have learned thus far. So we covered the document object model. Do you remember what a document object model is? In the simplest terms, document object model is a way we can access the elements on the HTML page. You remember the tree structure that we saw? Just imagine that whenever you're trying to code using document object model and JavaScript. We have learned the way we can access each of the elements that are in the document object model is by using certain methods that the DOM object provides. So do you remember some of these DOM methods? One of it is get elements by ID, another one is get elements by class name, and there are a few more that you may encounter from time to time. I strongly encourage you look at a few resources that I provide at the end of this chapter. So having said that, let's move forward. Okay, in the next session we'll be starting with projects. So the first project that we will be building is a simple calculator using HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Full disclaimer, I will not be covering HTML and CSS in detail. I will be focusing on JavaScript mostly for all of the future sessions. So this concludes this session. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next session. Take care.